First of all, just let me say that this class and today's day of study is and day of learning is sponsored in memory of Mr. Stanley Chera A by the Chera family, and I'd also like to personally dedicate it to all those precious nifashot that we lost over the last few weeks, and particularly a close friend, Jonah Goldschmidt. My subject is about our Aliyah. Shelley and I made Aliyah to Israel about 13 months ago after a lifetime in Brooklyn, living in what is arguably the most wonderful community in the world today. So you can well imagine that the decision to make Aliyah requires a great deal of thought and agony in going through the process. So what I'd like to do in the next few minutes is kind of divide that into what I would call the emotional or philosophical considerations that were to be made, and then talk a little bit about the practical aspect of Aliyah. So I'll start with the emotional philosophical. My own personal history, of course, is essential in what ultimately became the decision. So my parents were both Holocaust survivors. And though we grew up in a loving, very warm, very, very caring home, since my parents somehow, which I don't really understand to this very day, somehow compartmentalized their pre-Shoah life with their post-Shoah life. And once they got to America and married, they dedicated their entire lives to growing a family. And that love was very strong. At the same time, though the Holocaust didn't cast a great shadow, because my parents rarely, if ever, spoke about it, was always in the background in the most meaningful things. For instance, that I never knew grandparents. I never even saw a picture of my paternal grandparents. So that devastation was always a part of my life. In fact, one of my granddaughters just recently, when they were talking about the Holocaust on Yom HaShoah, and my daughter said to her, well, you know, Grandpa never had any grandparents. She wanted to know what I did on my birthday. How's that possible? So things like that, aunts, uncles, extended family, were all gone. On top of which, my father, particularly my father, and my mother to some degree as well, but particularly my father, was an ardent Zionist from childhood, and those feelings were passed down to us. In the late 1960s, I had the zechut of going to the yeshiva Flatbush, where Zionism is a critical part of the environment. And it was my opportunity at that age to kind of put an intellectual spin on my Zionist feelings, aside from the emotional tug that it had for me. Indeed, one of my clearest memories, I was in Flatbush in the late 60s, and I was there during the 1967 Six-Day War. And one of my clearest memories was that during those 6 days, they would broadcast news about the progress of the war over the loudspeaker system. And then there was a live broadcast, a live radio broadcast from Israel, where the announcement was made, Har habayit biyadenu. Har habayit biyadenu. He said it twice. The Temple Mount is in our hands. And we exploded with joy, all of us. And it was a joy that I don't think I'd ever felt in my life, although I can't tell you that I understood it intellectually. I'm not sure that at that age, I really understood what that means, that Har Habayit is Biyadenu. What did the Temple Mount mean? All I knew was that we got back an essential part of our own land, our own country after 2,000 years, and we were able to spit in the face of the world. That's what it meant to me. So there was this strong emotional tug. In the early 70s, because I had a large circle of friends in the Syrian community, I had the good fortune of being introduced to my future wife, Shelley Sarway, the daughter of Morris Alav Shalom and Rose Shetibedel Hayim, by a good friend, Alan Safdie. And ultimately, of course, we married. Shortly, within a couple of years after we married, my parents, and again, particularly my father, finally decided to fulfill his lifelong dream. And after 30 years in the United States of building a business and a family, decided to make Aliya with my mother, and leaving us in America, and went. And it wasn't quite as easy in those days. Telephone calls were like $10 a minute. I remember the phone calls we used to have with my parents. We tried to call them sometimes once a week, and most of the call was my father yelling, hang up already, it's expensive. So it wasn't quite as easy as it is today. But as I said, it was a lifelong ambition for my father, and it was something he felt he had to do, and they did it. As a result, for us, my surrogate family became Shelley's parents. And so all of our occasions, all of our celebrations, all of our holidays, both the first Seder and the second Seder, were celebrated with the Sarways in the Syrian community. And the more I was exposed to the community, the more I understood that this was the place where I wanted to raise a family. The values that were obvious in the community, the values of family, going into shul and seeing 2 and 3 generations sitting together, the allegiance to extended family, the chesed and the kindness of the community. These were values that were extremely attractive. And so we made our home there. In fact, we bought a home on Avenue J in the Bet Torah area. And that was the second most critical thing that happened to us in our adult lives. After being married, the choice of being in the Bet Torah community was a significant life changer for us. It was a place of love and warmth, where we grew as people, where we made lifelong friendships, where we were able to participate in growth. Member of the executive committee for many years. It really became a home away from home. It's the place where we met Jackie and Esther Hidary, our brother and sister from another set of parents, and many other very, very close and wonderful friends and wonderful relationships that are an integral part of our lives. So that was just a critical piece in our growth in our life. And ultimately, I would be remiss if I didn't add to the fact that it was also the place where I found my lifetime Rabbi Yehuda Ari Azenkot Sheikh, who has been an incredible leader, friend, and mentor, as well as a significant teacher. So I bring all that up because all of those pieces that were the components that went into the emotional considerations that we had to make. To be perfectly honest, the pull for me was significantly stronger than it was for Shelley. Shelley grew up in the community, spent her whole life there, had a great deal of fondness for Israel. In fact, as the children were growing and my parents were there, we spent many summers, 4 weeks, 6 weeks at a time in Israel, and had incredible experiences and wonderful memories of it. So I would say that Shelley had the same attraction to Israel as most people in the community have today. But if it weren't for one thing, I would have had a much more difficult time trying to get her to agree. And it wasn't easy for her altogether. Um, the one thing was that 10 or 12 years before we made Aliyah, our son Abraham and his wife Michal, formerly Arking, decided with young children to make Aliyah themselves, and they did. They were followed shortly by our daughter Tracy and her husband, Rabbi David Zayat, who were followed shortly by our second daughter, Rennie, and her husband, Simi Allen. So now we had 3 of our 5 children living in Israel. At the most recent point, we had something like 15 grandchildren there already. And so we were missing a significant component that was so terribly important to us. And it was the one, frankly, leverage that I had that helped Shelley go along with the decision, if you will. At the same time, we still had 2 children living in America. Our daughter Stephanie, married to Charles Sakal, and their children, and our son, Dr. Morris Kopyt, who recently had and now has his own child there. So we were still split, and we, of course, had to accept the realization that, at least inevitably for the time being, we were going to live in this split life. Although, God bless her, Stephanie and Charles, within less than a year after we made Aliyah, decided to join us here. So that certainly helped promote the situation. In addition to that, I had the advantage of, again, thanks to a yeshiva Flatbush education, I'm relatively fluent in Hebrew. I can read, I can write, I can speak, so I'm okay there. Shelley never had a formal Hebrew education. And so she's coming to a country at this age and at this stage in our lives without the advantage of mastering the native language. The offset to that is of course, that our children all live within literally minutes of each other in the same community here in Efrat, which is about 10, 12 miles south of Jerusalem. It's a wonderful community with a very heavy North American population. So English is probably the lingua franca of Efrat. It's as common, if not to some extent, even more common than Hebrew here. So on a day-to-day basis, it was somewhat less of a challenge than it would have been if we were in an exclusive Hebrew community. And actually, if I may, I think I can best illustrate the attraction by sharing my screen with you, which I believe I can do. I think can you all see that? That's a picture of Shelley and I with the family that we have here in Israel. So it helped make the decision so much more palatable to have that advantage. Give me a second here, and I will unshare the screen, which I'd like to do, but I'm having trouble doing that. Okay. In any case, pause share. Okay. In any case, those were essentially the emotional considerations that we went through in order to make this life decision. But we did, and I think I would just segue here for a moment into the more practical considerations, expectations, and realizations. As I said, first of all, Shelley didn't have the advantage of the language, and in general, aside from the attractions that we were leaving in Brooklyn, change doesn't come as readily to her as it does to me. And I would tell you that at this point in our life, had it not been for the fact that we had this great family infrastructure here, I'm not sure how possible it would have been to make the move. Our children have been just fantastic in helping us assimilate and acclimate into the community. So on the practical side, aside from language, which I said didn't turn out to be as critical an issue as you might think, there is the practical side. The practical side being financial, if you will. Although there are certain financial advantages in being in Israel, the fact of the matter is that for the most part, on a day-to-day basis, things like food are not significantly less expensive than they are in America. However, the earning power in Israel is significantly less. I looked up a number, and actually the average household income in New York was close to $70,000. The average household income in Israel was closer to $30,000 a year. And also I would point out that, first of all, $70,000 is certainly not the average household income in the community that we lived in. Even the $30,000 in Israel is based on the fact that virtually every household has two incomes. It's very unusual to find a household in Israel where both the husband and the wife are not working. So if someone makes Aliyah and comes here, for instance, just to take a with no special training, it's very difficult to reach the level of income that you would need to be comfortable here as well. And like I said, though on a day-to-day basis, some of the expenses, going out to dinner is in a good restaurant is not significantly less expensive here than it is in Brooklyn and things like that. We bought a Honda when we came here, which cost more than the Lexus that we drove in Brooklyn. But the flip side of that is that the cost, some critical costs are significantly less here. Housing is less expensive. It's certainly less expensive than it is in Brooklyn. So owning a house or renting a house on a per square foot basis is certainly attractive over here. And for us as a community, I would have to point out two things specifically. One is healthcare, which for the top level of healthcare in Israel, the insurance costs are negligible. They're probably 10% of what it costs to get the same type of coverage in the United States. And for a family, and particularly for our community, the cost of education makes a significant difference. Where a family of 4 in our community has a tuition bill of $100,000+ a year after tax dollars, a top-notch education in Israel can be gotten for anywhere from free to $1,000 a year. I mean, not significant amount of money. That in of itself can be a very attractive pull. So I said coming here and getting a job which was not the case. It was not our case. It could be a challenge unless you have a very specific skill or profession or high-tech background. And the alternative, of course, is a business. I don't know that I could ever recommend that anyone come here and try to start an Israeli business. We are talking about a culture that's different. It's the way of thinking, the way of doing things can be very different. Things that we're not familiar with, the kind of things that you would really need to be familiar with to start a business in the States. Just dealing with the tax department, practical considerations are things that are foreign here. You come here and you have to be able to navigate through websites, government offices in Hebrew, and it could be a challenge. It could be a challenge for anybody. At the same time, in Efrat, and this is our particular case, when Abraham made Aliya here, we had developed a back office and bookkeeping business where our clients are all in the United States. And so we have income, business income coming from the United States, while our overhead is an Israeli overhead. The advantage being here that our staff, for instance, the salaries that we pay are significantly lower than what we would pay for the equivalent talent in the United States. And so we're able to offer a good value of services at a reasonable cost to clients in the United States. And so that is a very significant portion of the economy of Olim, particularly here in Efrat. People who either have businesses where the revenue is coming in from America, or who have jobs where they can work remotely from Israel. And remote has become more and more of an option, as we learned the hard way in the last 6 or 8 weeks. I think that, ironically, as new business opportunities have developed in the United States, with so many people moving their businesses online, it perhaps has become even less of a challenge to figure out how you could live in Israel and still make a living, still make a practical living. As I said, also, there are cultural differences. Native Israelis are called sabras for a reason. A sabra is a fruit that's tough and prickly on the outside and sweet and soft on the inside. And I think that that's an ideal description of many Israelis. And so you need to accustom yourself to this new cultural reality. Although the truth of the matter is, on the one hand, Israelis can be very direct, which sometimes is challenging. At the same time, I've learned here the true meaning of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. We are living in a country where the care and compassion for each other in such a natural way is just absolutely mind-boggling. That's something that is not revolutionary for those of us who came from the Syrian community, but certainly a comfort for us coming to a new place and being surrounded by people who care. So as I said from the beginning, there were a lot of positive considerations for me, both philosophically and few challenges practically when we made the decision. But I will say that I don't think, and I'd have to speak for her, and she's watching me, so I have to be careful. I don't think Shelley's worst fears have been realized. We've built a really wonderful life for ourselves here. Of course, again, the advantage of having our children here is extremely significant to that. And even the language, Shelley's been taking Ulpan for the last few months, and she knows now how to get to the grocery store when necessary. So we've managed nicely, and I will tell you that I must honestly say that I have no regret other than the things that I will always miss about the people that we left behind in Brooklyn. At the same time, I'd have to stress that the distance between the United States and Israel, again, up till about 5-6 weeks ago, is much shorter than it's ever been. The communication is wonderful between the electronic communication of Skype and Facebook and things like that, and even flights, less of a challenge. So getting back to see those people that we left behind and be with those people on some sort of regular basis is not an overwhelming challenge, and certainly, hopefully, it will return to a state of normalcy in the near future. I'd like to also point out that there are as complicated as the decision is, there are times in your life when they're more complicated and times in your life when they're less complicated. Obviously, a single person coming to Israel is probably not coming with as much baggage as someone who's married, although most young single people who come here and join the army, and a soldier who comes here from overseas is called a chayal boded, which literally translated means a lone soldier, and that indeed is a challenge. The army is not a picnic over here; it's not going to camp. We have currently two of our grandsons who we're very proud of serving in a frontline commando unit. But on a regular basis, they are home for Shabbat. And having that family support is critically important to them, both mentally, physically. They get to eat the food that they love. And not having that here, I would imagine, would be a very significant challenge, although people are very warm and welcoming to those young people. Still, there's nothing like family, obviously. So in terms of what I would consider ideal time, I think young couples, our children came with young children for the most part. So you're bringing your core family. That's not to say you're still leaving behind people that are very dear to you, that you love, and it could be elderly parents, it could be aunts and uncles, it could be friends like the Hitteries, but you are leaving something behind. But when you come with your core family, it's a completely different move. And I can tell you that with all the grandchildren that we have here, Baruch Hashem, the Ken Yirbu, I'm very proud of the product that has been developed here in Israel, both thanks to our children and also to the social and educational system here in Israel. The other end of the spectrum is where Shelley and I came, which is at senior level in your life, where you don't have young children that you have to concern yourself with, but then you have the other challenges, all of which I went through already at length. I will say that I think a dream would be, just as we've managed to build a secondary community in Florida, it would be an ideal dream if we could do the same for our community somewhere here in Israel. As it is, retired people or semi-retired people spend a great deal of their time away from Brooklyn today, and of course it's in Florida. It's a closer commute. It's a somewhat less expensive commute, but there are trade-offs also. And public service announcement, I think it would be wonderful if there were such an initiative, and if Israel could be perceived of as a place to have at least your second home, if not your first. The I think I've gone through the essentials of both the cultural and the emotional things. Everybody will have, of course, their own considerations, but I can tell you that there's not a day that I look back and say that this has not been one of the most wonderful things that has happened to me to date in my lifetime. So I think we might still have a few minutes, and maybe we don't. Avi, are you there?
Yeah, hi. You have another class at 2. If you want to just take the questions you have in the chat, that'd be great.
Okay, let me do that. As
If
soon
you
as I
want, I
go
could read them for you.
Okay, why don't you do that?
Okay, so one of them is, would you say that the low Israeli income and the low cost of tuition, health insurance, lifestyle, etc., balance each other out?
Yes, I think to a great extent they do. Again, I don't know a significant number of American Olim who are strictly dependent on a very limited Israeli income. We're not exposed to a lot of them. But yes, to a great extent they do. I mean, if you consider tuition of after tax dollars alone of $100,000, you're $150,000 ahead of the game the minute you arrive in Israel. And you can afford to make that much less and still get an education for your children as well as health insurance. So yes, there is a trade-off there, Abe.
Sounds good. Okay, the next question is, would you have been as calm to make Aliyah before your kids were grown?
I think I personally certainly would have, because as I said, my strong attraction to the state and the land of Israel was already in me from childhood. I'm pretty confident that that would have been much more difficult decision for Shelley at the time. However, if I reflect on my children and who came with young kids, I don't think, I know for a fact that there are no regrets on their side.
Sounds good. And I think we're out of time. Oh, you
Okay.
have one more question. Maybe you can answer it quickly. Would it be the same if your kids married in Israel?
Would it be the same in what respect?
I think they're saying if they got married in Israel as opposed to coming in married.
Well, I have a nephew who did that, who came here and got married in Israel and built a wonderful life and a wonderful family for himself over here. So I see no downside in that. Just I want to tell the guys out there that Israel has an abundance of beautiful women. And I want to tell the women out, the single women out there, that there's a large abundance of magnificent men. We have a significant number of grandsons that we're willing to donate to the pool.
All right, good to know. Thank you. I think we're out of time. So thank you.
Okay, thank you all for joining us. Can we get a wave, a wave, a wave? There we go. Take care, everyone. Okay, Avi, I guess you're gonna have to pull us off.
Everybody could just leave it. You could just leave too. It's fine.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.